and hopefully they'll not kind of miss too much. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If anybody needs to access the live caption, they're just below on the right-hand side, the double C in the black speech bubble. So that's just at the bottom right-hand corner if anybody needs to find that. We'll just sort of all mute ourselves when we're not speaking, but hopefully with the spotlighting feature with us on the stage, yeah, that's all working. If you have any problems or trouble, just refresh your browser, and that probably should like allow you to re-enter the world back where you started. What else? Yeah, if there's any kind of issues that you have, any trouble, you can just message us in the chat. Emma's just also popped in a link to the live captioning on the chat as well. So the kind of format we're going to take is sort of 4 presentations, and after each presentation we'll kind of invite some questions via the chat function, but only sort of about 5 minutes. We'll try and aim for a sort of comfort break at around 3 o'clock, and then we'll sort of aim to sort of open up a larger conversation towards the end. And at the end of the workshop, we're going to kind of try something a little bit more interactive and an invitation to leave your ideas and thoughts in the world, but we'll talk that through a little bit later. So great. So welcome to Forest as Research. So it's one of a series of workshops and conversations which began with Forest as Forest back in November, another workshop, and continuing to the next workshop, which will be Forest as Human. So these dialogues are really part of a research and development for a project titled Forest, a durational artwork about how we can imagine and build a symbiotic future with the natural world. And the project is really beginning by asking him, how many trees does it take to make a forest? And collecting various reactions and understandings of that question. So it's a long-form exploration of how ecological thinking, conservation and nature recovery practices can affect and be driven by an art practice, and whether new models of thinking about site, resources, mental health and space can emerge from these conversations. And this workshop is, we're looking to build a conversation on ways in which we can learn and understand forest ecologies through multiple research practices. So from mapping and data capture, immersive relationships and long-form experimentation. So I'm really delighted to welcome presentations exploring this question from 4 unique perspectives today. And I'd like to start by, well, I'm delighted to introduce our first presentation by writer and poet, Zakia Mckenzie. So Zakia is a PhD candidate with the Caribbean Literary Heritage Project at the University of Exeter, researching Black British journalism in the post-war period. Her work has been featured many places, Institute for Modern Languages Research at the University of London, on BBC radio programmes such as Women's Hour and Farming Today, and her monograph titled Testimonies on the History of Jamaica is available to pre-order, published by Rough Trade Books. Welcome, Zakia.
Thank you so much. And my pamphlet is actually out now. It's out today, so you can get it today. But thanks for having me, and it's such a like a great place to come and actually first think about my own approach to writing, nature writing, I suppose, and also be able to kind of talk through it, which myself helped me to ground some of my own ideas. So I will begin by saying that, so in 2019 I was one of 2 writers in residence for Forestry England, and it was the first time they had such a position, so it was a really cool opportunity, especially as you know, I was born in England but not raised here, and so I hadn't experienced much of the landscape that was outside of Bristol, where I am now, and kind of London, where I was when I was much younger. So during that year, I was able to move around to some of the different, you know, forests all over. And these are, you know, about 2 years later now, these are kind of my experiences and how I moved with it. So I'm going to hopefully share a few photos with you. Okay, then they won't share at the moment, but that's fine. So as I said, I started in 2019, and at the time I traveled, and it included going to different locations. Whereas I was always into nature and would always move around. This project gave me the opportunity to move, you know, just places I would probably have never gone, because, you know, it just wasn't close enough to home, or there was no impetus to get that far. So, you know, I went all the way to kind of Kendal in Cumbria at the end, but also places like Bedgebury in Kent, you know, places much closer to home, the Forest of Dean, Lee Woods, where I am close, you know, here in Bristol. I went all the way up to, as I said, I went all the way up to Cumbria, but I was also in the Midlands, going to Hicks Point, you know, Hicks Lodge, open coal mines that are now young forests, and places that are, you know, at different stages of being what we see as forests. And I think it was, you know, that question of how many trees does it take to make a forest? How old do these trees have to be a forest? Was a question that came up a lot for me, especially as someone raised in Jamaica, where now when I think of forest, it's definitely woods. You know, the first thing, honestly, before I got into nature writing as a genre, it was definitely, you know, Robin Hood. It was definitely kind of Alice in Wonderland and the things that we get from folk tales, folklore, and popular culture, right? And I didn't necessarily think of the Jamaican landscape in the terms of forest, but it is. It's tropical forest. We have mangrove forest. There are different kind of forest ecologies on the land of Jamaica where I grew up, coming to England where we're talking about kind of like woodland managed forests here. So there were a lot of things that I suppose I didn't expect to encounter, because again, I was thinking Robin Hood, I was thinking these kind of nice fairy tales that just happen to take place in the woods. But my collection in the end, you know, came up with topics like air pollution. And I think in the very beginning, it wasn't what I set out to do. But I realized very quickly that I couldn't write nature writing in this day and age without doing climate writing, without thinking about climate justice, and also, you know, the situations where we are in places that I live and looking at the inequality that happens there. So at the time, yeah, I had a story that was definitely about air pollution. And I think because these topics are inextricably linked, and I always say, you know, in any kind of workshop, that I don't think nowadays you can be a nature writer without considering the climate crisis. And so this for me, being amongst these old trees and thinking about how much longer they could survive, or might, you know, what might change in the end, it was such a, you know, a thing I didn't expect, because again, this idea of the forest as this calming place. You go for forest bathing, you go for a bit of shinrin yoku, as the Japanese call it. You kind of, it's a place that we go on the weekends to relax, to kind of walk and well-being. But actually, it's, for me, I recognize it was a place that was fraught with, I suppose that it was the ideas that it brought was the ideas of the imbalances, that a lot of them are man-made, right? And so I was writing a lot about kind of climate situations. Again, not necessarily thinking that this was going to come out, but I wrote about the history of colonialism as well, because it was very kind of interesting to me. And I suppose I didn't even expect or know what to feel when I happened to be at like Westonbirt, which I call a tree museum, right? It has all these old trees, and seeing like, you know, like trees that aren't supposed to be growing in this type of landscape, or it shouldn't be. This is not its native home. These are trees I recognize from Jamaica, or it's like I'm seeing tea trees and things that we definitely know are only in this country because of a certain time of kind of botanical hunting that came with extraction and exploitation, and, you know, the age of colonialism outside of England. So I ended up writing stories like that too in a story called Rites of Passage. Similarly, we didn't expect that I would write a poem about love, but I ended up writing a love poem again because it was going through, meeting people of the forest and people that live in the forest. Again, this kind of the image, the kind of quintessential forest is us going and visiting it. But what about people that live in the forest and have their own stories and their very local ideas of what it is to be a part of that community? And this is the poem called The Fern Ticket came up from the Forest of Dean, because it's just, if you live in the Forest of Dean, you know about the Fern Ticket. Outside of the Forest of Dean, you don't know that the Fern Ticket is where, locals would call the Fern Ticket when they had their first kind of love experience, their first kiss or something, in the woodlands, in the forested area, right? So again, this is kind of local knowledge that we miss and we forget in the bigger stories often. And so in me writing my own narratives, I try to pull some of these stories in because, it's just nice to have these different perspectives, I think. So after my year with Forestry England, my writing kind of, again, because I was thinking a lot about what I knew from Jamaica and from the Caribbean, my writing turned to looking at these places together, right? And one of the great things that I'll mention here, is the story that I did with Invisible Flock, where I first kind of worked with them. And, this is a story about a mongoose in Jamaica, a very short story, and a squirrel in the United Kingdom, and a totally different species. But visually, if we could see the artwork from from Amy Balderson, we see that they're two animals that look very similar in a way. But what's more interesting to me, and again, this is kind of insider knowledge I have from being in Jamaica, but also now being in England, is knowing that these animals that we kind of have as humans in our own societies have a very varying ideas about them. And sometimes, are they, like the mongoose is invasive in Jamaica, and in a lot of our city spaces, they're a nuisance to have squirrels running around and have certain things like that. So again, it was looking at these kind of, my work here was looking at our cities and our landscapes and how we encroach on natural ecologies and forest spaces, and what does it mean for that area if once it's deforested or the ecology changes, and how is it that we consider our relation to those things that happen, and quite frankly, who has claim to the forest, who has claim to the landscape? Is it us, or is it the things that grow from it? And so again, some of my more recent work, again, questions of colonialism and old trees and the kind of misplaced species. Again, it was something I couldn't ignore in that year where I was writer in the forest. It's just that a lot of, I was seeing monkey puzzle trees that I know from seeing them in South Africa, and I just had to ask these questions like, what is this doing here? And they were quite frank with saying, like, these are things that came over here during the 1600s, the 1700s, during the age of botanical hunt, when we had Hans Sloane, William Blythe, names that are quite popular here along, among people that know natural history, but also names that we know on the other side for, just an example is like William Blythe. His name is a scientific word for, the national dish of Jamaica. And I think we don't ask these questions quite often about why the landscape is tied up with these questions of colonialism and exploitation is at the kind of crux of these methods. And so my recent work, a story I have in the Wild Isles, edited by Patrick Barkham, called An Elegy for Lignum Vitae, follows one of these stories. Lignum, we would say lignum vitae in the UK, but with my Jamaican accent, it's lignum vitae. And lignum vitae happens to be the national flower of Jamaica and the national tree of the Bahamas. Now we don't hear about this wood as we hear about mahogany and ebony, which are quite beautiful and are, were great among the Victorians and the eras before. But lignum vitae was the wood that was worked. It was the wood that was used to build the slave ships. It was used to, it's the hardest wood in the world. So it had so many kind of uses. And so again, learning about this, and actually at this point it is on, endangered lists. So it is a wood that was completely deforested in the Caribbean, South America, and parts of Central America, and even up into Florida as well. You get this tree, but completely just depleted, and it doesn't even grow that tall. It only grows to about 9 or 10 feet, and we just don't have it anymore in the Caribbean as we used to have. And we don't question it, but we make it our national emblems. And I had no clue about these, had no connection until I came here and learned about what its important was on this side, you know, on this side of the Atlantic. And so my work, again, uses this research of being in the forest and drawing the connections between the two spaces on the kind of natural history and lens, and only to give perspective to new stories or alternate ideas. And so that story, an Elegy for Lignum Vitae, speaks about this tree as a man who is dead, and it is a person who was on these ships with him, you know, a British man on these ships with him, kind of lamenting, oh my God, look what we did. We killed this man. Right. And so again, fiction, you know, historical fiction almost in a way. But I've found that for me, writing about the forest and the woodlands has something about personifying, has been a great way for me to tell these stories of nature and justice. I think they've been great, because that's the first one I did that with, was the one on air pollution, and it has continued to, I'll end quickly, it has continued to today, which you know, like I said, which Catherine said so wonderfully, the stories that I have out now, testimonies on the history of Jamaica. Now, the book that first came out about Jamaica, 3 volumes by Edward Long in 1777, I think it was, called The History of Jamaica, or General Survey of, you know, it had these very long title, and it became the book. To this day, it is the first kind of volume on kind of complete volume on history, environment, society on Jamaica, and it is the kind of cornerstone of all the histories of Jamaica that have been written since the British held Jamaica in 1655. Right, and so this book has stood for centuries. Edward Long, and every kind of novel, every kind of volume of history that has written has built on this. But actually, when I got the book and looked into it, you know, I couldn't ignore that it has been used so often, and it is being used as a justification for slavery and extraction of the natural resources from Jamaica. You know, saying things like the people are lazy, they don't cut down the trees, so we're going to cut them out and take them out anyways. And you know, we don't draw parallels between these things and where we are now in terms of the environmental and ecological situations with in Jamaica and the problems that we have with the land. So I think for me, writing, you know, figuring out these books, being in the landscapes and seeing these kind of disparities. Again, another one of these things is that, you know, I can meet people here who can trace their family history back 400 years. Like, we cannot do that on the Caribbean side, but we can trace these histories of imperialism and kind of invasion of the land. So my testimonies on the history of Jamaica is kind of saying, okay, here's Edward Long's book, and Edward Long's family, the Longs were actually there when the British captured Jamaica. They're a long-standing family, slaving family in Jamaica since 1655 and up until, you know, 1700s when he wrote this book. And so my book considers this our collective memories and what it is that we think on both sides of the Atlantic, and how is it that the UK remembers this time, the 1500s and the 1600s, when the land was acquired for most of the British West Indian colonies, and how does the Caribbean remember it? So it's a story of the importance of forest landscapes, of the importance of land justice, and how, again, collective memory and history, big H, and recording and archiving. So I think for me, all my stories and, you know, being outdoors and being in coming back to England and kind of experiencing the landscapes here really made me think a lot about how it is that we can recover narratives of land, you know, forest narratives, or the bush stories, or the folk tales that are not necessarily the histories that we've heard for so long. How is it that we can capture alternative point of views and more and different diverse accounts of what has happened throughout the land, and what it is that we can kind of get from it now in terms of moving forward. Because as I always say, telling these stories and kind of unearthing the histories that are there, There is no, we're doing it because we want people to see a wider picture and have ownership of something. But if we have these bad kind of testimonies that are attached to it and these bad stories, and people don't want to defend it. And ultimately, I am saying that, look, we have one planet and we're in a climate crisis and we need everybody on board. And until we make people feel welcome within a space by saying, look, your stories and your histories are valid, even though your histories might have been fraught with contention, but here it is, here is your space. So thank you, that's me.
Very much, wonderful, thank you. So kind of beautiful, sort of, and provocative, and this idea of kind of ownership over stories is so key, isn't it? Wonderful, thank you. We've given a few minutes to reflect. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to put into the chat, responding directly, or kind of observations or thoughts to kind of build on from. That's wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
So yeah, one question here about how much forest roughly is there in Jamaica, Miku? Ooh. Does anybody know that?
Oh, I'm here. Sorry. I tried to click the chat and it closed.
Oh no!
So I can't see if there's any. So
there is a question here from Miku about how much forest is there roughly in Jamaica. Do you know?
I should know. I should actually know this. So there are parts of the island that are still uninhabited because they're forest land, but I can't give you a figure right now, right? But especially parts, what I've written about in my pamphlet actually is how a lot of because the highlands. So this is definitely the kind of the parts that would most look like forest, that the forest that we see here, that would most look like a woodland. That part of the island is still probably untouched, up at the Blue Mountains, so the highest point, and so that when you're there on a clear day, you can see as far as Cuba. So these parts are still great to go and do the kind of typical forest things, the hiking. I did it one year when I was like 15. I don't know if I could do it now because it was so hard. But the kind of hiking and the bird watching and the finding the endemic plants and stuff like that. But I couldn't. That's something I'm going to write down to find out, because I should actually be able to say that next time. So thanks.
There's another question about your process or your journey for uncovering these alternative narratives. Yeah. I wonder if you could share a little bit of insight into those processes.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely just because I've always been interested in nature since Jamaica. So there are things that I've had in my head for a long time. So I know when I was young, there was a story that my mother used to read to us about a mongoose already, right? So a mongoose is just a great character in kind of Caribbean folk tales, Caribbean stories. Mongoose are just, mongoose are just great, they're just great characters. And in a very similar way, I think I've always seen like the squirrel or the chipmunk as that kind of family of almost mischievous, scurrying around animals. So I think that for me was just my a lot of it is just imagination and things that just might just be one little spark in my head and it works. Other things for me is just disbelief. I can tell you like the story about lignum vitae again. Lignum vitae, that story again is just disbelief of learning how important it was to the transatlantic slave trade, and just being upset that I grew up in the Jamaican school system, primary school, secondary school, and I knew that this was a national symbol, a national emblem, and just no clue, just no story about why. no story about the importance of it in the maritime age, you know, in the kind of age of the new world. And so I think that a lot of these were just like, no, somebody has to tell this story. Like I have to write this. Somebody has to hear this, you know, like I need to shout this. And definitely same with testimonies on the history of Jamaica. It was just reading Edward Long's book and just saying, but you know, some of them are just really funny places. So, you know, a really nice one is there's a place in Jamaica called Runaway Bay. And we all know why, we all know Runaway Bay. It's beautiful. We go there on holiday. But reading Edward Long's book and learning that it's called Runaway Bay because it was the point where the last point where the Spaniards ran away from Jamaica and left it for the British. It became a Runaway Bay because there they ran away, got on some canoes and rode to Cuba. Right, so it was cool in terms of learning kind of the history and things that people in Jamaica will easily recognize, but then learn a longer history for it, or people who don't even know it. That's just a funny story. Like that's how the British got Jamaica. Some Spanish ran away. They ran them out away and they rode in canoes to Cuba. So I think a lot of it was just learning the historical points and thinking like either this is not a narrative that I have from Jamaica or this is not a narrative that is told from the British point of view. You know, another nice one is that Oliver Cromwell, the protector, right? But my story is told from the point of view of Jamaicans. They call him not the protector. They call him their protector, you know, the person that persecutes us. So again, it was just thinking like, let these stories that have been told for so long from this perspective, what would another perspective look like on them? And just because a lot of the plants or the things were common, it was just great to pick up on those ones.
Last question I'll sneak in, if that's okay, from Alex, about whether you know if the Jamaican government have any policies or initiatives to support the natural ecology of the lignum vitae.
Well, it is, you know, it's protected in some, well, I say it's protected, but about a month ago, you know, there were advisors on illegal cutting down and exports to like Eastern Europe. I think they were, you know, there's a black market for it. So I say that there are protections, but not really, you know, not in kind of in practice. And you know, the reason why I suppose I even became an advocate for the environment started in Jamaica. It was because of a piece of land that the government was not protecting, and I thought it should be protected as kind of either eco or heritage, you know, for, you know, it could be an ecotourism site. And that was the first thing I did in about 2014, 2013, where I just wrote this letter to the newspaper. And it was so funny because I sent it to both of the national newspapers and they both printed it on the same day about this piece of land called Pinnacle, which again, it has cultural significance because it was probably the birthplace of Rastafari. And everybody in the world, if you know Jamaica, you know Rasta, right? You know Bob Marley, you know all these different things that come from Rasta. So it didn't make sense that the government of Jamaica would not hold this place for either the cultural significance or where it was, again, way up in the hills, the environmental significance. And that was where it started, really, was because I thought, like, this just doesn't make sense. You know, someone has to say, or we have to do things to kind of get at this government, you know, everywhere. So it's my, you know, I don't just do this thing here. It started in Jamaica because I didn't think the Jamaican government was respecting what we had in terms of the environmental landscape and the cultural landscape enough.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Wonderful. So I'm going to jump on now to introduce Riku. So Riku is a researcher from the Oulu University based at the Ulanka Research Station in northern Finland. So he's also the leader of the Sub-Zero Network at the University of the Arctic. And the last few years, he's also worked on terrestrial topics related to climate change and the effects of reindeer grazing. So welcome, Riku.
Thank you for having me. Is my voice coming through?
It is perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, so the the next presentation will be a bit more boring than Zakia's, I'm afraid. It's going to be a PowerPoint show, but I suppose it's all about the differences in viewpoints. Anyways, I'm really thankful for being here, and it's thanks to Invisible Flock, who we have been doing a collaboration with for a couple of years now and going strong. And I think we're going to find even some new ways to develop the science and arts collaboration. But I'm going to talk mostly about the science part today. And I think there's going to be other people talking about the arts part. So I'm going to try and share now my screen. Just a moment. Trying to use this thing here, but it's not finding my PowerPoint at the moment. I wonder why. Let's see. It did work when I tested it. Now it's there. Okay. Are you seeing it?
Yep, that's perfect.
Excellent. So first, a few words about the place itself. So it's about Oulanka Research Station and Oulanka National Park, which are situated in northeastern Finland, right in the middle of the national park. Actually, it's where the station is, very close to the Russian border, and also about 25 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle. So that's where we are. And it's a special place for many reasons, and one of them is that it's a national level hotspot of biodiversity. On the right hand side, you see this map of Finland with all the protected areas color coded based on the number of the European Union Nature Directive species, special species of special concern. And the only area that lights up as red is Oulanka National Park. So that's how important it is as terms of biodiversity. The station itself, there's a bunch of stuff to talk about the station, but we'll mainly talk about the ecoclimate kind of long-term manipulative experimental platform, which is in the forest about 300 meters away from where I'm sitting at the moment. But the station does have all kinds of other activities as well. We have a really good laboratory with diverse analysis equipment. And we have been collecting these long-term data series for decades, way before I came here. I'll show an example shortly. We also have pretty modern teaching and AV facilities for courses and microscope and microimaging systems and whatnot. Ben and Vic can tell you something about those if you want. Also do a lot of environmental sampling and stuff like that. And let's move on. And the main research topics at the station are experimental research on climate change and reindeer grazing pressure. That's the ecoclimate research platform that I was referring to. And there, the main topics are ecology, soil processes, plant ecology, biogeochemistry, carbon dynamics, and so forth. But we also have groundwater biochemistry, biogeochemistry research programs going on, quite newly started. And also a long tradition of ecology of streams and springs, and that's still going strong. And like I said, we have a bunch of long-term ecological and physicochemical data series existing. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Is it coming through?
Yep, it's coming through. Perfect.
Okay, excellent. I'll go back to the share then. I hope. Just wanted to make sure that someone's actually hearing what I say. Now it doesn't let me go back to the share feature. That's strange. Some technical problems. What are you seeing at the moment? Can you please tell me?
We're just back on the stage at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, so it kind of lost the connection to the share. I don't know why, but I'll try again. Application, now it's back. Okay. So Here's an example of one of our long-term series about the climate change mainly. So this is the river next door, about 50 meters from here. And we've been monitoring the freezing and thawing of the river for more than 50 years now. The last couple of years are missing from this graph, but I think it's pretty evident that even here, so far up north, we're not escaping from the effects of the climate change. So in roughly 50 years, we've lost almost 2 months of ice cover on a yearly basis. Obviously, there's differences between years, but the pattern couldn't be more clear, I think. So yes, we'd still have snowy winters and stuff like that, but the change is happening here as well. Here's just some imagery of the place to show you what it's like, some field action and instrumentation and some localities. Now, some words about the EcoClimate Experimental Research Platform, which is focusing on effects of climate change and radial grazing pressure. It's designed to look at separate and possible combined effects of climate change, and the variable in question is snow depth. That's what we manipulate there. And then also intensive grazing by reindeer. So we have fences where reindeer cannot enter, and elsewhere they roam freely and exert a very heavy grazing pressure. It's a replicated manipulative natural experiment, and it's designed to run for many, many years. Hopefully, when I'm dead and gone, someone else will be continuing. So that's the goal. We have 2 experimental areas. One is a dry, nutrient-poor pine forest. That's the one that's only 300 meters away. And then we have a nutrient-rich fen, which obviously is a wetland, and that's about less than 1 kilometer away. The reindeer exclosure at the pine forest site was erected about 27 years ago, but the fen exclosure is quite new, just a couple of years ago was erected. Both have lots of equipment there, lots of sensors, loggers and stuff like that, and most of them are completely automatic and operate year-round. There's a sister station by another university in the far north of the country, and they're building a kind of a carbon copy of our pine forest setup. So that's going to be exciting to be able to compare results from these 2 areas, which are about 400 kilometers apart and a different kind of vegetation zone. We're also aiming to get ICOS type of gas exchange measurements, and actually we already have some of that, and we're trying to get some funding to get the full complement. ICOS is kind of the International Carbon Observatory. I think that's where the acronym comes from, and it's like the kind of state of the art in terms of kind of monitoring CO2 and methane, what really drives the climate change. Here's an example of one of the 4 kind of areas inside this platform. So we have a central tower, which is, I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor. Can you see it? When I move the mouse? Is the mouse cursor moving? Okay, excellent. So there's a tower in the middle, and then we have a network of boardwalks, and then 6 blocks around it like this, and 4 areas more or less equal to it. Each equipment mast holds a lot of monitoring gear, all kinds of sensors, and then also there's sensors under the ground in each plot. In the forest side, we have 2 masts. They have both kind of above canopy level and a below canopy level, whereas on the fen we just have 1 level because there's no trees to speak of. And well, this is already old information, but there's now way more stuff. But at the point when I was writing this slide, about 200 sensors and a bunch of different cables to make it all run. Altogether, we have 72 manipulated plots of approximately 3 square meters, and then we have a bunch of stuff in each plot to monitor parameters. We've done some baseline vegetation analysis, mainly botanics, and we're going to redo it this coming summer. And we have some plans how to kind of fill in some gaps in the information that we have available at the moment. Okay. And this is just a schematic of one of those blocks. You saw 6 blocks around each tower, and each block has 3 plots, where in one plot we add snow throughout the winter. In one plot, we reduce snow, keep it to 25 centimeter maximum. And then we have the control plot where we do nothing. Snow falls and melts on its own. That's how we can kind of get to the effects of precipitation changes that are supposed to happen with climate change scenarios and models. So that's great. And each plot consists of a 1 square meter non-invasive kind of a monitoring quadrat where nothing is allowed to be done, because we need to keep that intact for future generations of researchers. And actually, that's one of the most difficult things about when you construct something like this that's supposed to produce good results for many decades. You have to be really careful about every step, because if we do something now that influences anything there in the long term, it will for sure influence the results that we get. So we have to really think carefully of each step. Each boardwalk, is it really necessary? Can we do without? And so on. So it's been thousands of decisions like that. So it's been a long way. It took about 7 years to kind of get from the idea phase to the kind of funding phase and then building phase. And now we're maybe 2 years into the phase where we get actual results. It's not ready yet, but it's quite close to it. Okay. The research focuses are, well, there's many. At the moment, there's the botanics, obviously, what goes on with the plant ecosystems there at the forest floor level, shrubs, herbs, lichens, and moss layers. Are there changes? And if there are, what kind of changes in community composition, richness, and so on? And then obviously what goes on in the soil in terms of the biological processes, the chemical processes, water, and so on. And there's different people looking at these different aspects. Changes in microbial communities, that's a new one. It's going to really pick up speed in the coming summer. So looking forward to that. And then even root growth is what we monitor now continuously. We have rhizotrons at the fence site on each plot. So basically it's a tube planted into the ground, which allows the special camera to be put in that basically scans 360 around it. So we get this huge image of soil underneath actually, and what goes on with the roots. And when you do that repeatedly, you can monitor even the small changes in the mycorrhiza growing and dying and so on, the dynamics of it. So that's going to be very interesting. Obviously, there's groundwater biogeochemistry. That's going to be one focal point, already is. And then the ICOS part, which is the energy balance and gas exchange. It's called an eddy covariance system. Basically, it combines all the information from the other sensors and then also looks at what goes on in terms of CO2 and methane. So that's like the state-of-the-art method there. There's a bunch of new stuff. Already mentioned groundwater research, but it's getting more, picking up more speed as we speak. And then we have upcoming field spectrometry, multispectral imaging, which means ultraviolet, infrared, and thermal range. On the left, you can see a couple of thermal images I took last winter from the fence site. And the plot you see here is snow removal. As you can see, it's a couple of degrees warmer than the surrounding environment. So it's functioning as it should. So there's warmth leaking up from the ground and escaping into the air. So then we're trying to get to ICOS field site level with the continuous methane and CO2 measurements. So that's in the plans. And we've now also become a part of Life Plan, which is a huge, big global project. Maybe the first kind of standardized way how to look at biodiversity and changes in biodiversity in a global kind of scale. So that's going to be very interesting next 5-6 years or so. And we're getting a really deep integration now with Aarhus University, who's our most important partner in terms of the research, and interesting links with Greenland with several stations there, and some even newer stuff. So there's going to be continuous sensors planted in the river, going to operate year-round, and they tie in with the whole system approach of looking at the forest, the fen, and the groundwater and the river. So it's a real system approach that we're aiming at. Already mentioned the microbial research starting this summer, And the newest link is the Finnish Geological Survey, who are going to start a collaboration with us, especially on the groundwater, what goes on with the carbon budget there and the nutrients and stuff like that, and how that ties into the other systems that we're looking at. And a couple of really expensive new toys in the analysis laboratory. It's a new nutrient analyzer and a Shimatsu TOC analyzer. Those are great. And Torvald Christensen is one of the probably highest ranking climate change researchers who works in the Arctic and subarctic. And now we're really getting a deep level of collaboration because he's going to be a joint professor of Aarhus and Oulu University by sometime in June, I suppose. So he's a great guy also. He's very easy to work with. So this is very good. And here's just a list of the core group of researchers and their institutes that we're working with, and some of the kind of European Union level infrastructure programs and projects that we're part of. And I suppose that concludes my talk. Not sure how I'm doing in terms of time spent, but.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Riku. It's fascinating, really fascinating. We are running a little bit behind time, but maybe we should sneak in one or two questions. And I know it would be really great to hear from Vic and Ben about the artistic responses to all the amazing research you're doing. It could be kind of great to kind of touch on as well. We've got a question from Dom though about have the forests near you been impacted by recent fires in the last few years, Riku?
That's a good question, and actually they have been impacted. So even though this is a national park which has been protected now for 60 years roughly, there's a history of forest fires that have raged through the area through the centuries. And there was actually a group from UK maybe 15 years ago, before my time. They came over here and they did a mapping of the forest fires, and they found out about 20 different aged fire areas within, let's say, 1 or 2 kilometers from the research station. And the youngest fire was, I think, a couple years before the park was established. So that's like 1950 something. And the oldest one they found in the vicinity was maybe, my memory fails me, but it was several hundred years ago anyways. So yeah, and that might be actually one of the things that drives the forest for vegetation patterns that we now see in the pine forest. There's patches that are covered with lichens if they're exposed from the reindeer. If they're not exposed, they're eaten to the ground. So it's mosses. But then there's patches of blueberry. So my theory is that some patches were burnt to the ground by the forest fire, others were not, and that's what we're seeing in the mosaic patchwork now. But that's just a hypothesis. I have no data to back it up.
Interesting, fascinating. Got another question here about are the land-based water cycles working in Finland from Eco Art Space? Okay.
I would first need to clarify, what do you actually mean by land-based water cycles? Not sure if I understand the question. Do you mean if the groundwater systems are working and producing drinkable groundwater, or?
So as I understand, this is Patricia Watts in New Mexico. As I understand, 40% of rain comes from land-based water cycles. The other comes from oceans. I mean, I see that you have, you're surrounded by oceans, so maybe it isn't such an issue, but in the United States, our land-based water cycles have broken down, and that's why we're having so much, the transpiration cycle, it evaporates, moisture evaporates quickly.
Okay, now I see what you mean. I think we're still pretty good here. In general, we get a lot more rain than we get evaporations. So that's why we have so many wetlands everywhere. So there's huge amounts of water everywhere. So I think the land-based cycle is still working very well. But actually, there's a couple of groups who are looking at water isotopes. There's a couple of papers. I think one's published already, came out in Nature, I think. And there's a couple others being written at the moment. And they're looking specifically at rainwater isotopes. Where is it coming from? how much of the rainwater is from the Arctic Ocean and so forth. It's going to be really interesting to see what really goes on in terms of the water. Where does it come from? Where does it go? And the carbon content of it and so on. Not sure if I answered your question very well, but
So I wonder, because we're running a little bit behind time now, whether we should have a short break. Thank you so much, Riku. We can maybe ask you more questions at the kind of bigger discussion if there's more anybody would like
sure,
to.
Sure, my pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So just a kind of really short comfort break. Maybe we can be back at 3:10, and Lillian will start us back off with her presentation. So yeah, see you all in 5 minutes. Thank you.
You're right. Nah, this one goes wrong.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you, it was short, but hopefully useful break. So shall I, if everybody's ready, I'll introduce you to Lillian. So Lillian is the curator and producer based in the Amazon in Brazil. She's co-founder and curator of Lab Verde program, which is a project dedicated to developing multidisciplinary contents involving art, science, and nature. Welcome, Lillian. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's such a great, it's so great to be part of this event and to hear so many voices, so many accents, and to see so many different landscapes. So thanks a lot for inviting me, Invisible Flux, and thanks a lot for organizing the events, the LEEDS Digital Festival. For me, this gathering here is also an opportunity to celebrate an artwork that we have been working with Invisible Flux called Yara, isn't it? Because we haven't launched this beautiful artwork that is a video artwork about the ancient tree of the Amazon, Macacaricuia cuiera is the species, and it's a tree of 1,200 years old that Invisible Flux did a beautiful narrative about the history of this tree and also how this tree changed the climate for over years and how the tree was impacted by the Anthropocene. So I'm just mentioning the artwork of Invisible Flux because I think is a wonderful example of one Lab Verde outcome. And I'm here to talk about Lab Verde methodology. And I'm not describing the program. I'm not going to tell you how it works, but I'm just going to do an open explanation about our methodology and about our concepts. And I think it's wonderful to be after Rico because he was explaining his methodologies and his wonderful scientific research. And I'm here just to talk about values. Instead of talking about data, I'm here to talk about values. So I'm sorry about my English. I'm gonna try to read a bit, explain a bit, and presenting some image. And it's going to be the opposite of the image of Rico. I'm bringing the sunlight and the tropical. Can you, sorry, just, I'm gonna share my screen. Can you see? Oh, I cannot see you if I open the.
We can see you and the presentation.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so let's go. So I'm here in the Amazon. I'm here in Manaus, where I live. Is a big city in the middle of the rainforest that is just connected by plane. So we are pretty much isolated. And I am from Manaus, and I actually live in the jungle near the city. And so Lab Verde is a platform to engage different actors and community to build knowledge for the understanding of nature, the natural phenomena, how we humans are related to nature, and the Anthropocene, and of course, the crisis of the environment. So, Since 2013, we are developing the Art Immersion Program in the Amazon, a residence program which Vitória Pratt from Invisible Flocks participated in 2019, where we join a group of artists and science on a journey through ecological reserves and also zones of severe impact of anthropogenic impact. So we are connected also to a scientific organization, is the National Institute of Amazonia Research, and this institution has more than 6 decades of history. So we have a whole history of data and information about the Amazon where we can use, where artists can use and develop their artwork. And we are organizing this journey, as I said, through navigating through different landscapes. We are navigating through different reserves, ecological reserves used by the National Institute of Amazonia Research, but we also are visiting lands of severe impact, like this land here that had was drawn by electric dam. And we are doing this gathering aiming to understand how language is related to nature and what is the role of art in a context of environmental crisis. We don't want to limit the environmental responsibility to the arts. I think this all disciplines should be working on this issue in all communities and all nations. But more than commit the arts towards environmental responsibility, we are trying to create together with different disciplines and set of knowledge, new meanings, new perceptions, new imagery. There is a new sensible regime of what nature is today. As I said, we are talking about values. And why creating a program in the Amazon to discuss language, to discuss science and to discuss language? First of all, I think everybody agree that the understanding that we have about nature is totally mistaken. All the understanding that we are support in the modern period, where nature was an object, a passive object that we are easy to dominate and exploit, it's totally mistaken. And I think the pandemic is showing us that we have to understand nature in a different way. So I really believe the rainforest has this capability of expanding our senses and our way of knowing. In the Amazon forest, life crosses you in a deep way, putting in contact with so many dimensions of life. For instance, the artwork that Invisible Flocks did. We're talking about the dimensions of time. But when you are inside the forest, you also have access to different dimensions of scales, different dimensions of substance, different dimensions of temporalities. And I think it's a wonderful place to unlearn our ideas about nature and also learn about plurality and also learn about diversity, and also know about ourselves, humans, as a species. So we are doing this research in the Amazon using a methodology that I like to call forest methodology, where I like to mirror how the forest works to develop our practice. And this forest methodology is based on 2 understandings that I like to share with you. the comprehension that nature is a subject who we can learn from, that we can share dynamics, and that is shaping our bodies, transforming us, and also transforming the planet. But what does it mean? It really means to say that nature is a subject. It means that humans are not the protagonists of the planet. We are saying that nature has an history, has memories, has intelligence, has rights, fundamentally has rights. And I think we are learning with our neighbor here in Ecuador that nature has rights and changing entire world jurisprudence. So the knowledge production at Lab Verde is based on coexistence, is based on a mutual understanding that we are the same thing and that we are also nature. So in the forest, there is no such a modern division like subject and object, nature and culture. There is no hierarchy between beings. So it's easy to understand that our body is also an ecosystem related to another ecosystem, related to another ecosystem, and so on. So in the constellation of knowledge that we are being exposed in the program and here in the forest, we have to learn also with non-human form of life. This is really important for us to share and to coexist. Oh, I'm gonna show you several artworks that is illustrating what I am saying. The other important understanding for our work here is to understand the landscape from inside. And here I would like to make a connection with the subject that we have been discussing, LEEDS Digital Festival, which is technology. Now we are more and more related to nature as data, especially image data. Sometimes even image data of nature that doesn't exist anymore. For instance, we are attached to an image of a polar bear, but we don't know even if the polar bear still exists. So through the imagery of nature, it's hard to understand the velocity, how environment collapse. So I think the environment is collapsing, at least what I have seen here in the Amazon. Environment is collapsing, but we are not documenting in the same velocity. Nowadays, we are also used to connecting nature to image data made by machines, like satellites or digital maps, numbers, graphics, transforming radically our perception of the planet. It seems to me that we keep on doing the same mistakes that is trying to dominate nature, control it, where our relation to the planet, to the earth, needs more and more of a technological apparatus to exist. So instead of creating technology to see farther, to control Mars, that now I'm hearing a lot about this research in Mars, instead of going to Mars, why not creating technologies that are helping us to deal with the problem here in Earth? Why not creating technology to create proximity, to create nature empathy, to create intimacy with the natural environments? That's also why I think the live experience in the field with no technological mediation, a view from inside, an intimate view is crucial for our understanding of nature, to create affection, to create empathy. And I challenge you from the LEEDS community to experience this nature, the nature that you still have, to experience nature with this sense of presence that I am thinking that is lacking. This sense of presence, to feel nature with all your body sense, but you understand that that nature, the forest at LEEDS, is the forest that has a history that is way longer than the history of your grandparents, way longer than the history of parents, of you. And also to understand how this forest is controlling the climate that you are living, and controlling the space, maintaining the space, maintaining the biodiversity. So I challenge you to experience LEEDS forest without a smartphone. So, as Bruno Latour, Isabelle Stengers, and also the Brazilian thinkers, Davi Copenhaua and Ailton Krenak, and those are two indigenous Brazilian thinkers, decolonized thinkers that we pretty like them very much. We need to practice a new ethics to perceive, to feel, to interact, and to compose with all forms of life on the planet. To compose with Gaia, as Isabelle Stengers is claiming. So perhaps we don't need data anymore. Perhaps we need actions. And when you are inside the forest, it's easy to compose with other forms of life, where you can feel the environment with your whole body senses. So here you learn that the rainforest is a land that we cannot measure. We cannot establish limits. The forest, when you are inside the forest, you realize that you cannot understand the species as individual species. You don't see where a forest starts and where a forest ended. Is everything like everything is connected to everything? Everything is attached to other species, and I really like to call the rainforest as an hyper object, as Timothy Morton concept of hyper object, that is a huge mass of a huge thing that is spread in time space, and is composed and is affecting many kinds of biodiversity. For instance, I don't know if you know, but the Amazon is recycling the air, and these airs go down to South Hemisphere and goes to polar cycle. And this water that the rainforest is sending to the polar cycles is maintaining the whole planet climate. So as I said, here we learned that the rainforest is a land that we cannot measure. We cannot establish limits. It's the opposition of the panoramic view where we usually see in the news. It's the opposition of space controlled by humans. When you start to have an intimate relations with the forest, and this is what the indigenous communities have, you realize that landscape exists and is being built independently of our understanding of it. Beings and nature forces exist beyond our imagination capability. So in Lab Verde, we like to use the concept of landscape in ecology. That is totally different of landscape in the arts. In landscape in the arts is a concept that is a human mind construction and representation of a site. And landscape in ecology is much way connected to beings, interactions, and relations. And this understanding, once more, breaks through the human exceptionalism, legitimating the nature forces, the void, the invisible, the unconsciousness. And here we learn that we don't know, we learn about the unconsciousness in the forest. So to conclude my talk, I would like to answer the question made for this workshop. How many trees does it take to make a forest? And I would like to appeal to John's Muir thinking to answer this question. I was thinking, well, many trees, but if a tree is not an individual, if a tree is a collective body, if a tree is providing life to so many other lives, and the other life is providing life to other lives, and is a complex system, right? So I started to think about this dimension of the forest and how forest is connected to the atmosphere, and how the atmosphere is connected to the space. And suddenly I realized that we need the whole universe to make a forest. We need the whole universe history, matters, and events to make a forest. Because the forest is just like the universe, a complex system. We don't know where it starts and where it ends, and is also full of black holes and unanswered questions. So that's it for today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Lillian. It was absolutely awe-inspiring and really beautiful. I think that yeah, it's truly inspiring, that idea, and I love. Well, I was thinking how love and time and how this is gonna. It feels like it's running through everything that all three of you have presented so far. That I feel was really, really exciting, and yeah, thank you. Really inspiring. I don't know if anybody has any immediate questions for Lillian now that you'd like to pop into the chat. We can also kind of carry on the discussion. Hopefully we'll have a few kind of minutes to be able to kind of keep the discussion going after the next presentation. So yes, I just thought I'd put that out there if anybody would like to add any questions into the chat. I was thinking about the importance of the journey, actually, from what you were saying, Lillian, about the journey, the physical journey during the Lab Verde program, but also perhaps that journey to those understandings and to those kind of being able to kind of find your understanding of seeing you being in the forest and understanding your context in the world. I think is yeah, a beautiful idea. There was Riku's asked a question about where you're based exactly in the Amazon.
We are here in Manaus, and Manaus, as I said, is a city in the middle of the rainforest, and we are actually in the state of the Amazon. And the Amazon is a huge state in Brazil, and there is most of the portion of the rainforest alive, because we don't have roads to reach the city, and you know that the forest is being killed by roads also. So we are a state that is pretty much conserved. It's most of the forest is still alive. It's a continuous, it's not fragmented, it's a continuous forest. And to Peru, for instance.
Lillian, would you mind stop doing the screen sharing? I think that it's still on.
Oh, sorry.
No, I just noticed that. Brilliant, thank you. Well, I'd like to invite Dom to join us on the stage, if that's possible. I can see you coming over. Wonderful. Thank you. Hi. So, hi, Dom.
Hello, thank you. Hello. So,
brilliant. Well, I'll just kind of introduce you. This is Dominic Stratton. He's Professor of Biosphere-Atmosphere Interactions in the School of Earth and Environment at Leeds University. He leads a research group focusing on the interactions between the biosphere, atmosphere, and climate, and understandings of how these interactions are being altered by human activity. So I feel like it's a perfect presentation to follow the provocations that Lillian has presented to us. So over to you, Dom.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And now I see what everyone else was saying. I can't see any of you when I'm sharing the screen. So can you all see my first slide?
Yep, it's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much for that invitation. And yeah, it's really great to speak to you all today, and really nice to speak after hearing such inspiring talks from the other speakers. And some of the things I'm going to talk about today will touch a little bit and connect to some of the other things we've heard. So hopefully that'll be quite nice. So I'm from the University of Leeds. I'm in the School of Earth and Environment, and a lot of my research is environmental science work, trying to understand how forests interact and alter the local, the regional, and the global climate. And thinking about how big a forest has to be, this is a picture of the Amazon forest. So it's the largest forest on the planet. And this is quite close to where Lillian is right now. So this is taken from an observation tower, a scientific observation tower in the Amazon called the Zotto Tower. It's 325 meters high, so it's towers well above the canopy. If you can see at the bottom right-hand side of the picture, there's two other towers, and they're 80 meters high. And here the trees are about 35 meters high. So it gives you sort of a sense of the massive scale of the forest. And this observation tower is packed full of scientific equipment to help scientists understand the interactions between the forest and the atmosphere. And a lot of my work is really focused around this one question that's really fascinated me for the last 10 years, and that's really what the role of forests are in rainfall, and do forests make it rain? I became really fascinated in this about 10 years ago when I came across this quote that's from Christopher Columbus, his diary when he was sailing across the Atlantic for the first time, and he made this connection as he visited islands across the Atlantic, that islands with more rainfall tended to have more forest. And he made this first connection about, well, is that something to do with the forests that are causing it to have more rain? Can everyone still hear me?
Yep, we can still hear you.
Yeah, brilliant. And so what my research group do is try to look at this problem from lots of different angles. So we go out into the forest to collect data. This is a picture on the top left in Vietnam, going into the forest and measuring all the trees and really trying to find out about the diversity of the trees within the forest. We also combine information from satellite data. So the bottom pictures here show images from satellites showing areas of forest and areas that have been deforested in the past 10 years. So the deforested regions are shown in purple. And we also combine information from models, from climate models, and the pictures in the top right show the flow of air around the planet that's simulated by those models, and how that's picking up and transporting water around our planet. We also do a lot of work much closer to home. So this picture on the far right is one of my students who's looking at how trees and woodlands impact water flow once it gets into the river, and how woodlands can alter downstream flooding. And so this sort of schematic here really kind of shows the importance of trees and forests controlling climate at these local to regional scales. And so here on the left, we've got a healthy forest where when the rain falls on the forest picks up some of that rainfall from the roots. So the trees have deep rooting systems that can pick up that rain, and through a process called evapotranspiration, they transpire that moisture back into the atmosphere, and that keeps the atmosphere wetter, keeps it moister, and that allows the atmosphere to rain again. And so this is a process called precipitation recycling, and so you can see this here on the left, where this rainfall is continuously recycled by the forest. And we know this is really important, particularly for large forests like the Amazon, where the Amazon forest is actually maintaining the regional rainfall across all of South America, and even more broadly through this precipitation recycling process. And then on the right here of the cartoon, you see what can happen if we start to interfere with that process as we clear a lot of trees. When the rain falls on the land, instead of it being picked up by the trees and put back into the atmosphere, it just runs off really quickly into the river, so you can get more flooding, and you get much less of that moisture going back into the atmosphere. And so that leads to much drier conditions and much less rainfall. And so we know this process is really important at these large scales for big tropical forests, but it's also really important right down to individual trees. And that's what I'm showing here on the right. The individual tree will put into the atmosphere each year about 1/3 of an Olympic swimming pool. And through that process, the trees also really cool the atmosphere. So each tree is acting equivalent to a big air conditioning unit in the amount of cooling that tree provides. And that process is because, again, when the tree puts that water into the atmosphere, it's like the tree sweating. It's like, as we sweat, that the evaporation of that moisture cools us, and the tree is doing that at a massive scale. So putting that water into the atmosphere, when it does it, it cools the local atmosphere. And that's why, one of the reasons why you move into under a tree or near to a tree or into a forest, it will always feel cooler than when you're outside the woodland. And so really, by both trees and woodlands and forests, by being these massive transporters of water through our climate system, they really not only affect rainfall, but also temperature at a range of different scales. And so now to kind of take that talk from the Amazon right much closer to home, this is a picture of the Yorkshire Dales in England. And this is a picture of what a lot of England looks like, a lot of the English uplands at least. So very deforested, virtually no trees. Most of the trees that are here have been non-native trees that have been planted for timber. But historically, many centuries ago, much of this landscape would have had much more trees, would have been scrubby woodland right across this landscape, even up into the hills and into the mountains. But because of those trees have been cleared in the past, and because the landscape is now very intensively grazed, mainly by sheep here, so you can see the sheep in this picture, then none of those trees have been allowed to re-establish over time. And so we're left with in general, a much denuded landscape in much of England. And in many of these places, you have to search really hard to find any biological diversity. So here you can see right in amongst some stones in what we call a grike here, some diversity here that hasn't been able to be grazed by those sheep. And we know this is causing really big problems. So we know that in England, biodiversity continues to have a catastrophic decline right across England and right across our national parks. So even in our national parks that are meant to be protected for nature, we've seen year-on-year declines in biodiversity. And we know that we need to address climate change, and we know to do that, we need to reduce both our carbon emissions from fossil fuel use, but we also need to reduce carbon emissions from agriculture and land use emissions by moving to much lower carbon farming practices and moving to a landscape with more trees and woodland that can absorb and lock in some of that carbon. And so we've very recently, just in the last few months, launched a new partnership project within the Yorkshire Dales, which is bringing together a range of partners that you see here to work together to try to find some solutions to some of these problems, to try to work towards a future for the British uplands that is more nature diverse, that has more woodlands in, that's wilder, but that can also support all of the local communities and the agriculture and the tradition that goes along with this. And so we're calling this project Wild Ingleborough. It's based around the peak of Ingleborough in the Yorkshire Dales. So this is the Ingleborough here, shown in the photograph. So for those of you that don't know where that is, this is a picture of map of Northern England, and the Ingleborough area is up on the left-hand side of the screen here. So Leeds is right in the centre. And so Ingleborough is the second highest peak in the Yorkshire Dales. It's 720 metres high. It's one of the 3 Yorkshire free peaks. So some of you may have come and walked around those peaks. As a well-known challenge to try and do Ingleborough, Whernside, and Pen-y-Ghent within one day. And what we're hoping to do is move to allow this landscape to become a bit wilder and to become a bit more wooded and a bit more treed. And so it maybe become a little bit more, in some parts of it, become a little bit more like the picture that you see here. And so I'm running out of time, so I just want to finish with this slide here, really to say we're hoping in the future for there to be lots of opportunities for people to become involved in this project, and we're really excited to work with a very broad range of people to work out how we can imagine this new future of a wilder English uplands. And we're hoping there'll be volunteering opportunities for artistic engagement. So it'd be great to hear people's thoughts about that, and also opportunities for citizen science to work alongside researchers from LEEDS to try to understand some of the changes which are going to happen over the next few years. So thank you very much for your attention, and yeah, really happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dom. Thank you. Perhaps we could pop the link in the chat as well so people can find that easily. I'll do that in a bit. So yeah, just opening up questions directly for Dom. I'm just wondering how you decide on what species to plant at the moment in Ingleborough. Like how's that process take place?
Yeah, great question. So there are little fragments of woodland in the landscape, so that can give you a guide to what species would have naturally occurred there. You can also do a pollen analysis to look at within tree pollen that's buried within soils and within peat, that can tell you more about what trees might have grown there, 50, 100, 200 years ago. But the main way is looking at these little pockets of surviving woodland and seeing what species are there and taking a guidance from that.
Great, yeah, that's really interesting. Rico asks about ditching and draining. Is that something that it becomes part of that process, or channelization of original waterways and streams?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rico. And yeah, we've got a massive problem of that in England and the UK, as you probably know. So pretty much all our rivers in England have been straightened and channelized, and banks put up to prevent them having any of their sort of natural instinct to be able to flow where they want to. And this creates massive problems, obviously, as you know, with the flooding downstream for fish, for aquatic life. So we may be able to do a little bit of that here giving streams putting wiggles back in streams and giving them a bit more life. There's also a lot of ditching and draining, as you say. So up on the peatlands and the peat bogs, back in the 50s and 60s, these areas were really heavily drained to try to increase agricultural productivity, and it didn't really work. But it has dried out the peat, and it has made really degraded that landscape. So we may be able to block up some of those ditches to try to re-wet those areas of peat and to make them healthy again.
We're just wondering about how you're legally protecting and preserving that land, because it's quite a big responsibility to take on that, the land. And I just wondered if there's sort of any kind of insight into that relationship you develop with the land, whether that's who owns the land in Ingleborough that you're developing.
Yeah, so some of the land, I kind of skipped over the land actually because I was running out of time, which showed that in a bit more detail. So the area that we're working, some of it's owned by Natural England, which is a government body, and some of it's owned by Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, which is a Yorkshire-based wildlife charity. And so they've got very good experience, obviously, of owning and managing areas of land for wildlife. But what's a really big problem in England and all across the world really, but particularly in England, is that most of our nature reserves are really tiny, you know, a few hectares, tens of hectares, and they're not big enough to support the wildlife that the area that wildlife needs. And so what we really need to do is to start to work with neighbouring landowners to try to find ways for them to manage their land in a way that allows nature to thrive at the same time.
I've got one last question that I'll give to you directly, Dom, from Jones. What impact does commercial woodlands have? So that they say, I don't like them, but are they helpful in the short term?
Yeah, good question, and a really tough one to answer, I think. I mean, we need commercial woodlands, obviously, because we all need wood products. We all, you know, use paper and wood in many parts of our life. So, you know, we need these commercial woodlands to be able to grow timber, and we're probably going to need more of them to do that in the future. I think those commercial timber plantations can sometimes be managed in a better way that's better for wildlife, but also in some countries like, you know, Britain, we have really small amounts of native woodland. So most of the woodland in Britain is commercial conifer plantations that are made up of non-native species, and that native wilder woodland is just really rare here in England. And so I think there needs to be a balance, and we need to be able to, we need both really.
Thank you so much. So I'm really conscious now that we've got 10 minutes before we have to leave the world, before it ends officially. We did want to sort of have a larger discussion on sort of understandings of the forest and kind of, I suppose we would like to actually kind of get a sense of, or ask that question to everybody here, of what does a forest mean to you? But we thought we might do that in a more slightly interesting way that perhaps populates this world a little bit with those thoughts and ideas, and perhaps just gives you a little moment at the end here. So Ben, are you around? Would you like to? Hi.
Stage.
You're on the stage. That's perfect.
Hi, yeah, so hi everybody. What an amazing group of talks, thank you. So just in the last 10 minutes before the world ends, although apparently we can stay, but still other people might have plans beyond the 4 o'clock cutoff. We wanted to populate this world with people's own feelings and insights and thoughts about forests, and we thought we'd do that by planting virtual trees in this little plot of digital greenness that surrounds us. So one of the things that we all have the power to do in this virtual landscape is to drop little objects. So on the left-hand side of your screens, you should see a little hammer. And if you click that hammer, you should then be given the option to open the object picker, which will then provide you with a big list of junk that you can put in the land. But if you were to search for a tree, you have the option to plant a maple tree, an oak tree, an orchard tree, a palm tree, or a pine tree. And we thought that if you select one of these objects and you have, so you select a tree, and then on the right-hand side, you have the option to note the object, which means that you can put a little message with your tree as you plant it. And so hopefully that's made some sense. If it hasn't, there's a little video over on the right-hand side of the world where Matt explains it a little bit more clearly, or find Matt in the world and talk to him and he can talk you through it. And so if we just plant some trees, and every time you plant a tree, if you just put a little note on the object, which is perhaps telling us what a forest means to you, or how you imagine a forest could define the future of a city like Leeds. And if you leave them there, next time people come into this virtual world, these trees will still be there and your thoughts will still be there with them. And we can gradually try and sort of build that up slowly from today. And so once you've done that, feel free to keep asking questions in the chat. And I suppose also feel free to leave if you feel your time here is done. Is that right, Kat?
Yeah, that's brilliant. But yeah, just before anybody does leave, I just want to extend out another heartfelt thank you to Riku and Lillian and Zakia and Dom for joining us today and sharing such beautiful presentations. And then also to all of you for joining us in that conversation. So do feel free to leave some other chats, kind of comments, and we'll keep talking, or have individual conversations as well. That's possible in this world if that feels more interesting. But thank you, and thank you to LEEDS2023. Emma, is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap everything up? I don't know. She might text something.
Oh, sorry, I was busy planting trees.
Sorry, Emma.
No, thank you very much. And you are all welcome to stay and explore the rest of the world. You're only in a really condensed part of it at the moment, and there's lots of artworks and things like that that have been planted here as well. So if you would like to stay and explore, you're really welcome to. And if you want to come back tomorrow, I'll put a link in the chat so that you can access it.
And also please do join us for our next workshop and talk around forest, which will be on the subject of
humans,
the forest as human, and symbiotic ways of living with the forest as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Lillian.
I'm off to plant some trees.
Bye, Ricky.
Let's see if I can do it.